Hello everyone and welcome to today's Bake Along. I am making something chocolatey. You know, it's been a while since I've made a chocolate dessert, so I thought today is a perfect time for my Italian chocolate torta. And this is a flourless chocolate cake. It takes a lot of chocolate and I want to get the chocolate melted right away so it has a little chance to cool. So it's a combination of, yes, some butter as well as the chocolate. This is unsalted butter, diced up. And you want to make sure you're using couverture baking chocolate. I leave it up to you if you want to use semi-sweet or bittersweet. Bittersweet is more in that 70% world. Semi-sweet is more 58 to 65. But being an Italian chocolate dessert, I think you need a good, strong, dark chocolate. It takes 12 ounces, 360 grams. So that's why I want to give myself time for this chocolate to melt. When you're first melting your chocolate, you don't have to babysit it. You don't have to be constantly stirring. Let the heat Give the heat a chance to get in through the bowl to the butter and the chocolate to start things warming up. You'll notice I use a spatula when I melt my chocolate. I don't use a whisk because in that melting process, when you're introducing a temperature change to your chocolate, you need to be gentle with it. It's a delicate, delicate creature. But really, this is at the heart of this chocolate torte. Its official name is Torta Tenerina, and it's from the city of Ferrara up in Emilia, which is, Emilia-Romagna is famous for its food. I remember once we went on a trip to Bologna. We thought we were coming for the States. Wow, the food was phenomenal. We stayed for a week. We toured a Parmesan facility, a prosciutto making place, Modena, famous for balsamic vinegar there. There's just so much delicious food. It's incredible. So it's natural that this Italian torta is delicious. Now, it's not a layer cake at all. It's a single layer torte. And it is rich and intense, so a little slice goes a long way, but it's a perfect way to end a beautiful dinner party. Say you're making tortellini from Bologna. That would be a perfect finish to make this dessert. So now that my chocolate is starting to melt, I'm giving it a gentle stir. And you may have heard me say this before, but chocolate melts at a lower temperature than butter. So you may find your chocolate's melted, and depending how you've cut up your butter or if it came right from the fridge, it might take longer to melt the butter than the chocolate. But that is why we love melted chocolate, right? Or chocolate at all, because it melts on the tip of your tongue so quickly. And I melt my chocolate when I'm melting it in a water bath like this. And because it's such a volume of chocolate, I prefer not to suggest using a microwave. It has too much of a chance to burn. You get that one little bit on the side of the bowl and you ruin the chocolate, and we don't want that to happen. So I've got my pot filled with about an inch of water that's just barely simmering. In fact, I'm going to turn it down a little bit. I've got the butter in the chocolate to protect it. And I am adding other ingredients. So chocolate in this case, you don't have to worry about the water so much as if you were making bonbons or truffles where it's pure chocolate. So now you can see all the chocolate's melted, but I still have just a few little gems of butter in there. And I think with the heat of the bowl and now the warm chocolate, I'll turn off my heat. And I'm going to transfer this to another bowl to cool it down. But you can see we've got those little butter pieces that will finish melting. And gradually the chocolate will cool down. You don't have to cool the chocolate to room temperature for this recipe, but we don't want to introduce the other ingredients to hot melted chocolate to shock the chocolate. So even changing the bowls is going to cool down the chocolate a little bit. There we go. And already the butter pieces are almost gone. I'll set this aside for a second. And now work on my dry ingredients, which I want to whisk together. And the reason I do this is, of course, for the obvious, to combine them. And I'm adding my granulated sugar. But really, instead of sifting cocoa powder, by adding it to the granulated sugar and then whisking it with my other ingredients, that essentially breaks up any lumpy pieces in the cocoa powder. So I am using Dutch processed cocoa powder, which has that intense chocolate color. The acidity is reduced. I am not concerned about how the cocoa powder reacts with any leaveners because we're relying on egg whites to give the cake a little bit of volume. So really, if you have conventional cocoa powder, that works absolutely fine. It's up to you. Typical to a torta tenerina, a flourless Italian chocolate torte like this, is a little bit of starch. So we're not adding any wheat flour, but I am adding a bit of starch. You'll see in the recipe, you can use cornstarch or potato starch. I leave it up to you and what you have available. I think traditionally, potato starch is called for, but sometimes that can be a little tricky to find. A touch of salt, and now I'll just give this a little whisk to break up any lumpy pieces. There we go. Now we'll bring the chocolate back and just stir out that last little piece of butter. Oh yes, there it goes. Bye-bye. It's melted. Now I'll add the cocoa sugar mixture all at once. And I think I can switch to my whisk here and just whisk it in. So the sugar will dissolve a little bit, but not fully, which is why I add a couple tablespoons of milk. And I find that really promotes that final dissolving of the sugar in the recipe because you've got between the chocolate and the butter, not a whole room for that sugar to go anywhere. So in goes my 2 tablespoons of milk. So that's 30 ml. You don't have to heat it up. But if you can let it come to room temperature, that is better, mostly for the chocolate. And now, this recipe calls for 4 large eggs, which I've separated. So I have the yolks, my whites are already in the mixer, and I'll add the oats. There are no oats in this recipe. Yolks to the chocolate. So this recipe has a lot of elements you might think of in a souffle. And even though this cake rises up, because of that quantity of chocolate, it lifts a little bit, but it actually settles into place. So it's more truffle-like than anything close to a souffle. Okay, so now that everything's combined, I can set that aside. And I'll whip my egg whites. So to point out, the eggs were at room temperature because you'll get a fuller volume faster if you have room temperature eggs. I'm not adding any sugar to them, so they're not going to get thick and glossy. I'll whip them to a medium peak, and without sugar, this really doesn't take a lot of time. So don't step away when you're whipping your egg whites without sugar. You know, it's interesting how when you whip egg whites without sugar, you don't get that volume, because when sugar dissolves into egg whites when they're whipping up, well, that allows the egg whites to stretch. The sugar dissolves, giving more volume to your meringue. So 4 egg whites with sugar could be almost double this volume. But this is, of course, without sugar and ready to be folded in. Just give myself a little elbow room here. And whether it's a third or a half, it really doesn't matter, but you don't want to put all your egg whites into the cake at once. And it's okay that they break down in this heavy, chocolatey, buttery mixture. It's expected that they will deflate, but whipping the egg whites gives them a bit of volume memory. So when the cake bakes, there is space. So this isn't dense like a truffle. It is lighter. I'm trying to, you know, souffle's up here, chocolate truffles up here. This torte texture is about here. In terms of density is what I'm referring to. Okay, now that I've got that first addition, lightening up my base, I can add the rest. Get every last bit of egg white and chocolate out. And a last quick fold. If you've watched my videos before, you know I have a habit, and I do recommend not folding too slowly. You want to be careful and deliberate, but time is the enemy. You want to get this cake into the oven, and if you take too long to fold your egg whites, well, the egg whites are deflating as you're doing that. So a little faster is actually better. Just making sure I don't have any streaks or ribbons of white or undermixed chocolate in there. And I think we are set. I've prepared my pan already. So this is a 9-inch, 23-centimeter springform pan. The bottom's lined with parchment, and then I greased and put granulated sugar on the sides. Because there's no flour in the recipe, there's no need to introduce flour just to the pan, and then someone who might be gluten-free couldn't enjoy the cake. So sugar adds a nice little crust on the outside edge of this torte. In goes all the batter. Make a little space. There we go. And the chocolate will re-melt a little bit as it goes into the oven, so you don't have to pull out your offset spatula necessarily. Just use your silicone spatula to spread the batter to level it as nicely as you can, like so. I've preheated my oven to 350, and this only goes in the oven for 20 minutes. And you'll see my instructions call for 20 to 25 minutes. Do not go above 25. What you're looking for is you'll find the top of the torta loses its shine. And so you know you're done. And you will see the sides, the whole torte lifts up a little bit, and you'll notice just a few little cracks at the outside edge. That's when you know it's time to pull it out. The torta will still be jiggly. Just think of that volume of melted chocolate in there. So don't expect it to be set. Any further than 25 minutes, you risk overcooking it. And you just lose that silkiness on the palate. So 20 to 25 minutes. And that chocolate takes a while to set up. So you cool the torta to room temperature. And I like to serve it not ice cold, but for the ease of taking it out of the pan. I do this with my chocolate brownies too. Even though I don't like eating them chilled, I chill them so they're easier to cut, easier to extract from the pan. And here is the torta. So you will find when it comes out of the oven, it's quite lifted, but then you will see it sink in the center a little bit, just like this. So you can even detect here how it's a little dull around the outside edge, but the center has a nice sort of satin look to it. So that's how you know it does look like this when it comes out of the oven without the center sinking a little bit. So you can always throw a couple strawberries on the cake itself. Why not a dusting of icing sugar? But because this is a simple cake, it's meant to be enjoyed simply on its own. If you're a fan of citrus, and a lot of you know I love citrus, some segmented orange slices would be delicious, especially maybe with a drizzle of good Italian olive oil on the citrus. Spectacular. I should complete my thought about the chilling, not chilling. So I chill it so that I can get the cake out of the pan. If I'm making this a day ahead of when I want to serve it, I do keep it in the fridge, but I make sure I pull out the cake 30 minutes before I want to serve it, just so that it's not ice cold, because of course, all of that chocolate might set up on you and be too firm. This had 2 hours in the fridge. So you can see it is super duper soft. To call it fudge-like is not an accurate description because it is far silkier than fudge. And while it's rich, it's not dense or heavy because of the whipped egg whites. So that is a beautiful, elegant dessert. Simple ingredients. Quality does count when it comes to making a torte like this. It's got a great story. It comes from a region that is famous for delicious food. So you can trust a recipe like this to impress yourself and your guests. I'll be honest, it's been a while since I've made this recipe. Why did I wait so long? It's delicious. I hope you'll give this recipe a try, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for another delicious bake-along recipe. You notice I'm not waiting too long to take a second bite. See you again soon, everyone. It's been a pleasure.